Hi, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending where you are when you're tuning into this community broadcast at GFN 2023. This is the community broadcast that will actually take us into the formal proceedings, the opening of GFN 2023. But in the meantime, I've got two great guests to talk to. I've got Barnaby Page, who's from the market research company eSig Intelligence, and Caroline Beaumont, who's a GP from Australia, who's a tobacco harm reduction advocate and deals with tobacco harm reduction in relationship to her patients. But I'm going to start with Barnaby. Just talking about tech for a minute. Everybody who's got an iPhone knows that we've been through about, 12, 13, 14 iterations of the iPhone. And with each one, you get a tweak of the camera, or they slightly improve the video. You basically still got an iPhone. And I just wondered what you think is needed within the, and we're not just talking about e-cigarettes, there's heated tobacco and the oral products as well. Do you get a sense of what's actually needed in the field, or what you actually know from the work you do that's kind of coming round the corner in terms of anything that's likely to move the products on, or are we still in this, what I would call the iPhone stage?
In the incremental stage, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can never, by nature, we can never rule out a completely unexpected innovation that's sitting in a lab somewhere today. Right. So let's take that as read. And you know that there are some, particularly in the oral area, there are things that are things that will be coming to market. I think in the next few years. I was talking to a guy as well today, who was trying to develop something that was kind of in the middle ground between a pharmaceutical and a consumer product and so on. So there is innovation going on, but I think it's probably fair to say we're more in an iPhone stage still, and will remain so. And I think that's for a couple of reasons, really. One is that the fundamentals of what the consumer wants, I don't think have really changed. Right. Given that the consumer is typically a smoker, or former smoker, they want nicotine delivery equivalent to cigarettes in terms of speed, in terms of effect and so on. And they want ease of use. They may or may not, want some degree of the cigarette smoking ritual. Some people may actually want to distance themselves from that, but some people certainly want something similar. So those kind of fundamentals, I think, are still really what is going to drive product design, whether it's e-cigs or heated tobacco or at least other non-oral products, for the foreseeable future. But the other factor is regulation. Right. And developers of products are bound by regulation. In Europe, for example, we see things like, the limits on nicotine strength laid down by the TPD. We don't know what will come out in the next one. In the US, we see effective policies on product characteristics laid down by the FDA, even if they're not made explicit. So that's going to kind of constrain development a little bit. An interesting thing there, of course, is the prospect of bans on flavors, that's to say non-tobacco flavors. Which are slowly starting to appear in a number of countries. China, of course, has a high-profile one. The Netherlands has one. In the US, there is effectively a ban on e-cigarette flavors implemented by the FDA, even though it's not explicit. So once flavors are removed, and I think that is just going to happen more and more and more, there's also going to be a question of how do product developers individuate or segment their products. If you can no longer do it by flavor, what else do you do? Do you make them look different? Do you produce colored vapor? Do you have little flashing lights at the side or what? So that's another driver. And then I think the third one, which is becoming very big this year, is the environmental issue. Disposables, the rise of disposables has been the big story of the last year or so. And there's a lot of anxiety about the environmental impact of disposables. It's very, very likely that we will see something in many countries, perhaps not a disposables ban as such, but something like mandated reusable and removable batteries, which amounts to a disposable ban by any other name. So I think regulation will be a big driver of product design, even though the fundamentals remain the same. Where we stand then is, in answer to your question in brief, I think we are in an iPhone stage. I think we remain in an iPhone stage. But we must remember there were mobile phones before the iPhone.
Yes.
So we could be there without knowing it, and the real iPhone could be just around the corner.
Right. Thank you. Caroline, just thinking about the people you see, the people who come into your surgery, whether do you smoke, or they do, or they've got a lung problem of some description. I mean, how does the tobacco harm reduction idea work in your practice? What exactly happens? What's the dialogue that goes on?
Sure. So I guess you're referring more to my specific tobacco harm reduction practice, which is separate to my my other life, which is just as a regular GP who will come in for all sorts of things.
Well, and both really, because your regular patients will have issues with smoking.
That's right. Yes. So. I guess the approach there is maybe spread out over several consults, but if I guess just focus on my actual tobacco harm reduction patients, which is nationwide, and because of that it has to be telehealth based. So we actually don't have face-to-face contact, so we'll have phone calls, email contact as well. So the conversation with them, it's purely about tobacco harm reduction and then getting their script for nicotine, which is what is needed in Australia.
Right.
So with them, they have a quite an extensive questionnaire, which they do.
Right.
Originally, it started, and this was 3 years ago, with more in-depth conversations, and it's all about first things like the basics of their medical history, smoking history. So why did they start? When did they start? How much did they use? What have they tried to do to stop? Where are they with their journey of that? And then usually they've already started vaping, and then they come to me because they need a prescription to keep vaping. So then we explore further about, I guess, what has improved in their life since starting vaping, and the improvements are amazing, and they're well above and beyond anything that I would have ever anticipated. And then I'll ask things like if they couldn't access their vape, what would they do? And most of them say they would return back to smoking. Some say that they would try to access vapes via the black market, and even some say that they would use other drugs instead. So I collect a whole lot of sort of behavioural information about their smoking and vaping use. And then finally we get onto the specifics of what they actually need on their prescription, so whether they're using disposables or pods or refillables. Usually it's the pods or the refillables that they tend to use. I think that the vast majority in Australia of disposable vape users aren't worrying about getting a script. No. So those that I think take the effort and bother to actually come to me to get a script are the ones that are using the higher quality products.
So where are you based?
So I'm based in Victoria, in Australia.
So if somebody's in Darwin and wants to, how the hell do they find you?
It's called Google.
Oh, okay, fair
Word
enough.
of mouth as well. I think I mean, obviously there are quite strict limitations on medical advertising, so I can't just put a big banner up. And I mean, in terms of advertising for the fact that I, prescribe or that I do a prescription for a vaping product, I cannot mention that word, vaping and prescription, together. But I can certainly talk about tobacco harm reduction and alternative options. There's, I think, a fair bit of awareness of my service through the vaping community in Australia. Some other doctors refer their patients to me as well. But anyone in Australia, and most of my patients are from Western Australia and Queensland. I get a lot of truck drivers, actually, people in the mining industries, people in construction. So that's probably 60% roughly of my patients would be out in those areas rather than in my hometown.
Right, interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, you mentioned, Barnaby, the environmental impact, and that seems to be the big thing, particularly disposables in relationship to youth vaping. So that seems to be the current kind of narrative. What can the industry do about this? Where do they take it? Because the danger, of course, is that there are enough obstacles in the way of trying to get tobacco harm reduction through the use of safer products accepted generally. And now, of course, everybody's aware of recycling and climate change and all of that kind of stuff. And this seems to be not so much a conspiracy, because it's true, but it's quite a convenient new thing to throw at tobacco harm reduction. So where next? What's the role of industry in trying to help this?
I think that's right. I think it is a convenient new thing to throw at tobacco harm reduction. And I mean, I was saying yesterday in one of the sessions here, actually with regard to flavours, but it's much the same, with regard to disposables. The debate about flavours is really a proxy for the debate about underage vaping. Nobody actually cares about flavours as such. What they care about is kids vaping. And so arguing about flavours is a way to approach that. And I think it's, to some extent, it is the same with environmental issues. And I think if one wanted to play devil's advocate, one could say, well, even if there wasn't an environmental issue, it would still be magnified and blown up, simply because of the association with underage vaping. Having said that, to be fair, there are a lot of disposables, they are by their nature being thrown away. I live in the UK where, it's visible, as indeed you do, I know. Yeah. I mean, I see them on the ground at the bus stop in a way I didn't 2 years ago. I think the industry will to some extent have to be led by what happens in terms of regulation there. And that may well affect product design in quite fundamental ways, particularly where batteries are concerned. Of course, there is European-wide battery regulation, but there's likely to be more and more of that. But I think recycling schemes are also definitely a way ahead, a more short-term way ahead to go, short of completely overhauling products. Now, those in themselves are not necessarily easy. You have to provide the consumer with some kind of motivation to join the scheme. Then you need to figure out, well, where do they actually take their vape to recycle? Does it go to the retailer? Do they stick it in the mail? And if so, who pays for the postage, and so on and so forth? None of it is entirely simple. But it is, I think, an issue the industry absolutely has to address. Right. And it may well, in fact, give quite a significant role to industry associations now. That's something that they can focus on in a way that they can represent the industry to governments and to the consumer.
Right. And presumably, it's also. I mean, I've been asked this question by the media as well, and I'm saying, well, there's border force, there's trading standards. We heard yesterday, I can't remember which session it was, but over 2 or 3 years in the UK, there was like 19 prosecutions for illegal sales to minors, and the whole lot amounted to about £2,500 worth of fines. I mean, it's if government and our government are really serious about this and are making a big fuss about it, then they have to put the effort into to stopping it or controlling it, rather than using it, like we say, as another brickbat to potentially impact on adult smokers who often use disposables as just a way of trying it out to see whether this is going to work for me or not. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think the number is a bit more than 19, but it's not actually significantly more.
No.
And I mean, I think, I've always said this. I think, the issue of underage vaping is an issue that has to be addressed not through product design or product characteristics, because you risk sacrificing too much of the benefits of THR that way by making the products unappealing to adults as well. It has to be addressed at retail through enforcement. That's really, if you can stop the young people getting hold of the e-cigarettes in the first place, then it doesn't actually matter whether they are theoretically appealing or not, because they're still not getting their hands on them. So it's retail primarily, and advertising and marketing more generally. Though, I think the industry is a little unfairly castigated in that respect, actually, as well. Kids do see advertising aimed at adults. This is inevitable. And I remember a few years ago an outcry when an e-cig company, I forget what it was, advertised during the Super Bowl in the United States, because X million young people watched that. But in fact, if you look at the audience breakdown for the Super Bowl, it's very middle-aged. It's not a young person show at all. It's just because the audience is so huge that nevertheless quite a lot of young people saw it.
Saw it.
But if you were trying to reach young people, that's not
you
where
wouldn't
we
do it
would
for
advertise
Super
at
Bowl.
all.
No.
You know,
Okay.
but appearances are everything in
Well,
a post-truth world, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Caroline, I saw a survey a while ago. I think it was either of Swedish and UK doctors, or it may have been UK and US doctors. I can't remember exactly. There was two strands of doctors in two different countries, and some ridiculous, something like 40 or 50% of them thought nicotine causes cancer. I mean, what's happening with medical education? What are they being taught? Or do these things just not come up in medical curriculum? I don't understand how they can be quite so misinformed.
I know. The nicotine literacy or lack of is it's definitely a big problem. When I was in medical school, certainly we were taught, a lot about the evils of smoking and the issues with it and the smoking-related death and disease and all of that. But there was never, ever any separation of tobacco and nicotine. It was all just lumped into one big thing.
Right.
Even, to the extent of... we're always taught that someone with inflammatory bowel disease, if they smoke, it can actually help it. We were never told why. It was only recently I found out that it's nothing to do with the tobacco. It's actually the nicotine itself. So even the one possible benefit of cigarettes that we were taught in medical school, even that they didn't say, oh, by the way, it's actually the nicotine. So we're just never ever taught about any potential benefit or role of nicotine, which is just separated to the tobacco. So then it stands to reason that it all just gets lumped together, and then nicotine is also, related to cancer. I mean, you'd think it should be a no-brainer. I mean, you'd think that people in general, let alone doctors, should know that the issues that the death and disease is caused by the combustible tobacco, but
they really don't.
They really don't.
I mean, since I've been working in this field, and I've been talking to people, people with university degrees and PhDs and whatever, and I explain that, the real danger of that cigarette is when you set fire to one end of it. That's where all it's like, oh, really? People just generally don't know, and I think there's a huge information deficit, really, in terms of the general population. It's almost as if governments don't want you to know this. It's almost as if they want you to think it's all of a piece.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a huge challenge for the industry. Of course, we have coming up the Michael Russell oration. It was Michael Russell, who said, they smoke for the nicotine, they die from the tar. I think maybe we can hope this is partly a transitional thing. Remember, until, say, 15 years ago, nicotine did mean combustion, apart from a minority of people using snuff or oral products. There was no non-combusted nicotine, so it more or less came to the same thing. So it's understandable people rolled them together. But it's certainly absolutely crucial, I think, it's the fundamental thing to understand about THR is that separation of nicotine and combustion.
Absolutely.
More than anything else.
I just wanted to come back to you were talking about the separation between the people who come to you specifically from wherever, all over Australia, for tobacco harm reduction advice, and the people who come into your surgery with a bad cough or something, and presume you ask them, do you smoke? And they say, well, yeah, I'm on about 30 a day or something. How does the conversation go after that, if it does?
Well, I don't then...
throw a vape.
I don't sit back in aghast horror. I certainly don't judge them. And look, as with any other aspect of having a dialogue with the person sitting across from you who just happens to be the patient, you just have to meet them where they're at, and I just ask honest questions. So I guess what I don't do is say, look, you really should stop smoking, because they know that. They know that. But I'll just say something along the lines of, look, I know you're not here today to discuss smoking, and I might make a slight joke of it, just make it a little bit light. I'll say, but look, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't just say something about it. So I'll just say, look, if you ever want to talk further about where you're at with smoking, you can talk to me.
Right.
So I just put it there. And sometimes they'll bite and sometimes they don't. But more often than not, they'll either say something like, look, it's not something I want to address right now. And I'll say, look, that's fine. Just know that I think it's an important topic and you can always talk to me. And we just leave it there. Or they might say, yeah, look, there's something I like to do about it. And if, we often won't have time in that particular consult then to explore further. But I plant the seed and I'll say, look, come back. And be more than happy to have a chat. We can just chat over the phone. We can do telehealth. So I just get it going.
Right.
Plant the seed, and hope they bite. And it's just about opening a dialogue, really.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, do you need, as probably one of the 5% of GPs are actually prescribing in Australia, do you need some sort of special license, or how does the whole licensing thing work?
It's a funny situation. So it's in Australia, you hop online to a government website and you apply to become what they call an authorised prescriber of nicotine.
Right.
But in fact, you don't need to do any training for that at all. There's no special knowledge you need. It's really more of a way that the government, I suppose, can track how many prescriptions are being written. So all you really need to do is just put in your registration details. You have to agree every 6 months that you'll submit a list of how many new prescriptions, how many repeat prescriptions were given. So it's really just a matter of them having some sort of database. So it's actually a very simple process, except government has managed to make it a lot more complicated than it is. So there are various forms and there are various flowcharts, and there's about sort of 6 different things that kind of pop up and links, and it should be a straightforward process, but it's not. And it's not, and so it becomes yet another administrative burden, which is why something like less than 5% of Australian GPs have signed up to become authorised prescribers.
Is that because they just don't want the bother, you think?
Well,
they don't agree with what's happening. Yeah, they want to be a nicotine prescriber.
So why aren't more doctors signing up to become authorised prescribers of nicotine? Yes, well, firstly, they don't know about the field like many other people. They get all the negative media. They don't know about the field. I guess I do find a few doctors, because again, I ask my patients, firstly, do you have a regular GP? Have you spoken to them about getting a prescription? Quite a lot of them will say, look, I've spoken to them, the doctor's interested in it, they just don't know what to do. They don't know what to prescribe, because most doctors don't smoke, most doctors don't vape, so they don't know what to prescribe. And
that's an interesting point about what actually gets prescribed. I mean, is it like, there you go, mate, that's it, you've got no choice, we're not going to give you flavours, that's it, take it or leave it. Yep. Or is there choice about what you can actually get when you go to the pharmacy?
I guess from a prescription point of view, I guess the one good thing is that the only thing I need to write on the prescription is the nicotine itself. So it doesn't matter what flavour, what brand is being used. So I always believe you have to give people choice.
Yep. Right.
Otherwise, they're just going to.
So it's up to the pharmacist what he or she decides to stop.
That's correct. So I guess you've got the prescription issue, and then you've got what can they actually buy.
Right.
So on the prescription, I do an upper limit, and it's fairly generous. So they can order pretty much whatever strength that they usually use, or however many number of disposables or pods. Okay. Usually the script will have more on it than they need, but that's fine. I just write they can get up to that. If they take it to a pharmacy, they'll be lucky if the pharmacy will stock their preferred brand, but they can order it overseas as well. So at the moment, the script doesn't even need to hit a pharmacist's desk at all. That might be changing in Australia, but at the moment they can just use the script, and then that gets attached to their order, usually from New Zealand, and it comes through, and then if customs opens the pack, that they'll see, there's a script attached.
That goes with it.
Yeah, so it's an unusual sort of script model, because it's the only prescription I know of that you actually don't need to show it to the pharmacist. Yeah.
That's really
that might change later on in Australia.
Okay. Barnaby, I think we're probably about another 4 minutes or so. Just about the speed of transformation. because the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World, they do this tobacco transformation index.
Absolutely.
And it's quite clear there are one or two companies that are, fairly much ahead of the game in terms of their product development and markets and all the rest of it. Most of the others in this top 15 or however many are way behind and don't actually seem to be making progress at all. I mean, what's your take on the need for everything to sort of speed up a bit? Or is the amount of money they're making out of cigarettes still so huge in relationship to safer products? It's a kind of, why do we need to bother?
I mean, I think, Flora from BAT made a good point in one of this morning's sessions. Okay. I think it was talking about lower and middle income countries. This thing is a process. And, it's easy to forget how mainstream THR is now compared to where it was 10 years ago.
Right.
I used to comment to my colleagues every time we saw somebody in a movie or on TV using an e-cigarette. Wow, did you see? We don't bother doing that anymore because it happens all the time. Okay. Is there a tipping point that we have yet to reach, or are we actually already past the tipping point into the mainstream? I think that's quite possible, and we're now just going to become slowly more and more mainstream. With regard to tobacco companies themselves, I know the Tobacco Transformation Index well. I think it's fair to say that the big players are all pretty committed to this space. I mean, some of them have done more than others.
Yeah.
The ones who are lagging far behind are significantly smaller, and they tend to be operating only in one or a small number of countries.
Right.
So I think, globally the tobacco industry is getting there. As you say, combustibles are not going to disappear overnight.
No.
I suspect the world in 10 years will not look massively different than it does now, except there will be a lot more users of THR and a lot fewer smokers, but it'll still be more or less the same world. I think the world in perhaps 25, I'm guessing, years could be quite unrecognisable.
Right.
I could imagine smoking a cigarette might be like, say, smoking a pipe now. A few people do it, but it's a really obscure hobby.
Yeah.
My gut feeling is we're on that sort of time scale. It's not as rapid as people would think, but it is coming slowly but steadily.
Right.
I don't think we're in for a great time in regulatory terms. I think it's going to be a bumpy ride. I don't think THR is going to be banned or anything, but I think the climate is more negative than positive at the moment.
Right.
So that's not going to help, but
sure.
The impetus is there nevertheless.
Do you think, the UK is often held out as a kind of, progressive outlier in terms of the kind of regulation, and some people think we're mad and all the rest of it. Australia, of course, very much at the other end of things. I know you're not a regulation person, but do you get a sense that it's just going to get... how far do you think they can go before they just... Because apparently there's about 100 million disposables being imported into Australia.
Yes.
And they must think... obviously they don't want to just stop because it looks like they're going to... You lose face by doing that. But where could it go? Are you at all optimistic that they'll begin to take the brakes off, or you think they're just going to dig their heels in on all of this as far as they possibly can?
Yeah, look, I guess I'd like to consider myself, an optimistic realist. So, look, certainly even just some discussions that I've been having earlier today with some of our other Australian colleagues, is that even though at a national level, federally, it is very much, ban the vapes, protect the children, ban the vapes, THR doesn't get a look in. At a state level, in Australia, there does seem to be some more political support. So I guess I agree with Barnaby.
Optimistic realism.
Yeah, look, it's going to take years.
Yeah, of course.
I would like to think maybe in 10 years' time there's going to be a very big difference in their approach in a good way.
That's great.
Yeah, so 10 years.
That's your mark. Right, okay. Thank you very much, Barnaby and Carolyn. That's been great.
Thank you so much.
I'm now very pleased to be handing over to my colleague, Jess, who's going to start the whole ball rolling. Over to you, Jess.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Warsaw. We're so pleased you're here with us to celebrate the 10th edition of the Global Forum on Nicotine. Welcome too to those of you who are joining us online. Do please get involved in our online chat and Q&A if you're watching us online. We hope you all enjoyed the workshops held yesterday and today, and we are really grateful to the workshop organisers for creating such interesting and topical discussions. The feedback has been brilliant. And now we proceed with the conference programme. Tonight we're looking forward to the awards, to Roberto Sussman's oration, and to the party this evening. Tomorrow and Saturday we will have keynotes and dynamic discussions from tobacco harm reduction experts. Selected sessions will be streamed and translated into Chinese, Russian, and Spanish. To see how to access the translations, please look in the conference reader on page 9. There's all the information that you need. We're really grateful for the support of our GFN 23 media partners. Filter, Two Firsts, Planet of the Vapes, Red, Tobacco Intelligence, and Vaping Today. And we are delighted that they are all here with us on site and will be covering the event over the next few days. We're also really grateful to the Marriott Hotel for giving GFN such a comfortable and welcoming home for the past 10 years. I know that, you're here, hello. I'd like to welcome the director of the Marriott Warsaw, Dariusz Olekshuk. He will say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Darek Olekshuk. Today we gather here to celebrate a milestone in the history of cooperation between our venue and KAC Communication, organizers of the GFN conference. It's my great pleasure as a director of a Marriott Hotel to welcome you all to this 10th edition of the GFN. Over the past decade, this venue has played host to some of the brightest people who have dedicated their lives to understanding nicotine and advocating for tobacco harm reductions as means to save lives of smokers. The conference has had a profound impact on shaping the conversations around nicotine. It has served as a bridge between researchers, policymakers, public health professionals, and industry leaders, fostering an environment of a collaboration, exchange, and shared learning. It has been a catalyst for the change, inspiring the development of the new approaches to harm reductions and public health strategies. But it is not just the knowledge and the debate that define the GFN. It is the people, that passionate individuals who have dedicated their careers to improving the lives of those affected by smoking. You have created a forum that encourages respectful and constructive dialogue, where diverse perspectives are welcome and shared. As we embark on the next chapter of this incredible journey, I hope you enjoy the facility we offer, as well as many attractions of this great city, Warsaw. I personally wanted to thank you for this 10 years of collaboration, and that you are a part of this hotel as a client. It is important to build long relations between place such a like hotel and the client. Thank you very much.
And now my colleague Grzegorz Kroll will take over the proceedings. Thank you.
Hello everyone, here in the room and those watching us online. Dr. Roberto Sussman is a full-time senior researcher and a lecturer at the Institute for Nuclear Services of the National University of Mexico. He specializes in general relativity, cosmology, and other areas of physics. He is the founder and director of ProVapeo Mexico and a member of INCO. Roberto actively works towards promoting proper regulation of tobacco harm reduction products in Mexico. He advises consumers on countering misinformation and prejudice and directs efforts to share scientific information about nicotine and safer nicotine products, which happens to be the subject of his today's oration. Roberto, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your nice welcoming. I have to see, yes, okay, that's the beginning. That's me over there, and where I work. And I'm very happy very honored to be addressing to you in this oration. And okay, hope I don't have technological problems here. Here it is, perfect. Okay, first, from galaxies to vapes. How I got here? Okay, sorry. Okay, yes, short guy. Okay, how I got here, right? Okay, a bit slow. Okay. I was a happy smoker, right? But I have to be honest, I always resented anti-smoking policies, and especially anti-smoking bans. And I had no intention to quit. I was quite happy, and health problems took a long time for having signals of this type, and I never thought about that. I just smoked, that's it. And I agreed with indoor bans, and I complied with them because, I understood that non-smokers had to be protected from my smoking, right? So I understood that. And it reached an equilibrium. Sometimes I questioned the justifications, like why not having a smoking section and non-smoking, but it was not so important in any case. However, I never thought that smoking was going to be banned outdoors, like, for example, in a windy beach, or in the whole campus, a huge campus was banned, and also in parks, in open parks. I never imagined that. It happened. In fact, during the early 2010s, there was, these bans were taken in many communities in the United States, expanded to Canada, to Australia, and that really took me off, no? And then celestial music, our aim is to protect the health of the population, especially the children. And that immediately triggered my bullshit detector. Yeah. Then I have a training as physicist. I know gases and aerosols because galaxies and aerosols, they are run by physics, And I knew there was no science behind that, but nevertheless, I wanted to see references. And I asked lots of people. And this is the type of reply I got, for example, from MDs that I asked them, say, you're an astrophysicist. You understand galaxies and black holes, but you don't have medical training. So you cannot understand the immense damage that even a small exposure to smoke can cause. And so, in other words, I was being told that there is some sort of special medical knowledge that is beyond my reach, and that is also beyond the realms of the physics I know. I have heard these explanations when I've talked to priests or rabbis. This type of explanation, you cannot understand the creation, etc., Big Bang, I don't care, etc. Okay, well, but still, this was not an important issue for me. It was just in my background. And also, I was told once, and this was by an American MD, who was more or less connected with tobacco and with oncology and things like that. He told me, you are missing the big picture. Don't come with your physics arguments. We want to save lives. These bans are absolutely necessary. It's the only way we can break this damning addiction propelled by a predatory, powerful industry that is killing so much people. So, in other words, our task is too important. We don't need to explain to you. We're saving lives. Come on, we're saving lives. Yes, we hide some truths, which is a form of lying, but it is for your own good and for the common good. At least this was a very honest reply. Okay? Finally, I had a glimpse of the evidence, of the scientific evidence. It was the Helena Montana miracle. What was that, for those who don't know? It was an article by, you'll see who, you can see already who, claiming that outdoor smoking bans produce a 60% reduction of admissions to heart infections in a remote place called Helena, Montana. This piece, this article, was received with a lot of praise. The New York Times, the BBC, the Lancet, the sources that I trusted, and they were giving a lot of praise to this thing. And I knew it was fraudulent. Well, it was simply a random fluctuation chosen for convenience. Why it didn't happen in 1 million things that you can question of this thing. Now, this article has been cited 690 times. These are more cites than my best cited paper in 30 years of career. And it was debunked in 2016. And the author, the Stanton Glantz, never acknowledged this fiasco. He never said, no, I made a mistake, sorry. No, he defended it. And then he was never reprimanded, or nobody called attention to him. Nobody said anything in the medical community. And outside of the medical community, nobody was interested either. Now, this man has accumulated more than 27,000 citations from 18,000 documents. So, for me, this is a short circuit in tobacco control science. And if something like this, in physics, this would not happen. Somebody who makes this fiasco will not get so many citations and will be marginalized. So this, now, there is no science behind this, so what are the justifications? And it's worth reading them. For example, this article in the New England Journal of Medicine, it is about a discussion in which a commissioner is explaining council members the goodness of the bans that the then Major Bloomberg had been imposing in New York. And he wasn't very convincing until he had to emphasize, and I quote, he had to emphasize the importance of protecting children from exposure to adult smokers who would serve as negative role models. Families, he said, should be able to bring their children to parks and beaches knowing that they won't see others smoking. This is the argument that a homophobe would say about homosexuals, right? We have to be frank in this, okay? Okay, it's the normalization, stupid. I got it there. It's, what is the normalization in terms of outdoor smoking bans? Notice I'm not talking about research on smoking, on inhaled smoking, on indoor bans in smoking. Those I accepted. I agree there was substance, but we're talking about outdoor bans. And it's an institutional effort disguised as science whose goal is not protection of public health or understanding. It is the eradication of a conduct, even in conditions where this conduct is not causing any harm, right? So all this, all this is in the past, okay? 15 years have passed, and at that time I recognized that smoking was the issue, okay? So in 2016, I became a vapor, like millions of other people who use harm reduction products as substitute of smoking. So we can say that maybe with smoking, there was an utilitarian justification for the normalization, right? We can say smoking is so harmful that the end justifies the means. I do not agree, but I understand this reason. Now, the question, can this be justified for vaping? This is the question, okay? And there are ominous signs that an ongoing institutional effort is undergoing to denormalize vaping as it was done on smoking. There are signs of that, right? Now, are we going to allow this? And my answer is absolutely not. No pasarán. And this is what has brought me here. This has combined my passion as an activist, as an advocate, and as a scientist, right? And so this says, why am I here? How come galaxies to vapes? Okay? Tobacco nicotine science. Let's have a look at it. Okay? The tobacco control community is split as a reaction to the disruption of vaping. We have the American-centric model in which THR is associated with a regression. They see it as a regression over the goals, so the original goals against smoking. And they have updated their goals, the original goals. Now is anti-nicotine. And also, a very interesting thing is that the fulfillment of a regulatory policy determines the science. And as opposed to this conception, we have a British-centered dissenting minority. And this dissenting minority is saying that no, it's the opposite. These products are helping to the original goal of eliminating smoking. And they also oppose this idea to be anti-nicotine. And also they say, no, policy must be subjected to science, not science subjected to policy. And of course, it's a big conflict, okay? But it is not a symmetric conflict. It is very asymmetric because on the side of the majority, you have a lot of resources, the FDA, CDC, the organ associations, the medical establishment, the Bloomberg complex, the WHO, etc., etc. And who's on the other side? Well, essentially, health institutions in the United Kingdom and New Zealand, and individual scientists and consumers. So it's a very uneven conflict. And of course, the tobacco industry is completely outside of the picture, etc. No? So I would like to dwell a little bit on the similarities and differences between what I call common science practice and the science practiced by the majority orthodox tobacco control. I think that the dissenting minority is following more common science practice, and there are external similarities that make it hard to appreciate the profound differences internally. All of them are in the same type of institutions, right? All of them have similar type of staff, professors, students, postdocs, etc., right? And they engage in similar activities, publishing in peer-reviewed journals. But there are significant differences. Orthodox tobacco control science does not resemble other types of science, other scientific communities. For example, orthodox tobacco science say science is settled. We hear that. We heard that from the US surgeon, Carmona, said science is settled, therefore there is no need for more fundamental research. The main core issues are fully known. There is no need to go on further. And disruption and dissent are unacceptable because they are challenging solid science or promoting the interests of the industry. On the other hand, in common scientific practice, we never say the science is settled. Science is temporarily settled, and it is subjected by a majority peer consensus that is always unstable, right? And therefore, replication and criticism and dissent are essential. Disruption and dissent are unavoidable and are accepted, and we're encouraged to do it. We're not blocked to do that. Okay? Now, a single conflict of interest with the tobacco industry is absolutely determinant. It's even regardless of the technical merit. That is a totem, absolute totem, right? And people live terrified that you are going to be pointed out as having a conflict with the interest conflict, and the interest conflict is never well defined. It's always advancing to microscopic micromanagement, right? Okay, there is no equivalent of this attitude in any other science that I know. Even climate change, they invite car companies. I've never seen something like this. And even orthodox tobacco control science doesn't do that with other industries. So there is also a narrative, the narrative of the Trojan horse, in which all THR is a strategic marketing strategy to bring new addicts. There is this narrative is prevalent. And the totemic animosity against the industry, perhaps it was justified in 1990, right? But today, this narrative allows, in many cases, I'm not going to say every case, but in many cases, tobacco control researchers, the orthodox ones, they deflect criticism by pro-THR research, alluding real or imaginary conflicts of interest with the industry. Can be the tobacco or the vaping industry. And this has created a toxic academic environment, right? Because the fact that policy determines science allows many sloppy papers to be published as long as they support the policy. This is the main criterion, then lots of technically sloppy papers move. And this, yeah, I've just said that, right? And there is a large volume of literature, of papers that agree with this policy but are technically sloppy, and the author, this is completely self-sufficient. Authors can cite this literature ignoring authors that do not follow this policy or this type of literature. And I think the fact that there is no exchange of ideas, it is a toxic environment, academic environment. Let's make a quick tour around the science today. First, I have this interpretation of what are the motivations of the orthodox tobacco controllers. I repeat that people in tobacco control who are part of the THR minority are not acting like this. So we have this diagram, those who are ignorant on THR and knowledgeable, the idealistics and the cynics, and there are transition zones. So here is the majority of junior researchers. They are idealists, but they are very ignorant on THR, partly because they are recent. Now, some of them might cross the transition line, remain ignorant, but become cynic. I'm not saying this is a tendency, I'm not saying everybody follows it. And most professional THR community remain idealist, but have become knowledgeable. Why idealist? Because if you are opposing it's an unequal conflict, academic conflict. You have to have some idealism to do that. That's why I assume they are idealists. And then you do have people who are knowledgeable, but nevertheless are cynic. I personally know people like this. I have talked to them, right? So this sort of explains more or less. I hope I did not offend anybody. Now, what is the science? First, we have inhaled and exhaled emissions. This is taken care by, it is multidisciplinary, by analytic chemistry and aerosol physics. There is also pharmacology of nicotine. Nicotine is also inhaled. And we want to know the biological effects once this material enters to our body. So we have preclinical, cytotoxic, and animal models, and we still don't know how much this translates to humans, but we can speculate. And then we have laboratory studies, which can be biomarkers, can be in the lung, respiratory, or cardiovascular. And then we also have the smoking cessation issue, which is dealt either by clinical studies, observational cohorts, or by randomized control trials. And this is the domain of the medicine, right? And of course, we also have subpopulations, teen vaping, and this is handled by population studies and statistical methods. Okay, so I'm going to start reviewing rapidly these different areas. Like the most frequent methodological error that people do that are looking teen vaping, there are several. For example, the usage of the past 30-day measurement disregarding the frequency or not playing down the frequency, and this is a major flaw. The fact that they don't, a lot of commentators, they say there is a teen vaping epidemics, whatever, but they do not go to the numbers. Another flaw is they are ignoring that most of the usage is exploratory. The few that are frequent vapers are the ones that are, this is the liability hypothesis. And also, gateway has to be gateway in and gateway out. You have to look at both cases. Some studies exclude the smokers, so they don't know how many smokers go into vaping. And they also assume that automatically that flavors are the attractor when there are other factors as well. And finally, it's very important, they ignore the vape substance. And a lot of teenagers that are vaping cannabis are using tobacco products. So these are flaws. Now, considering these flaws, in my opinion, and I know many people agree, the vaping youth academic is a political construct. It has no scientific substance. And of course, youth vaping is a concern, but it's not the major crisis or problem that it is used politically. And here. Okay, nicotine. What's the problem in the case of nicotine? For example, the effect, the deleterious effect in the development of adolescents. This comes from a few rodent studies, but nevertheless is voiced as a fact. And also, claiming that it promotes tumors when this evidence comes from rodent studies, and this ignores the massive epidemiological evidence from snus usage in Sweden. Cohort studies on CBD and respiratory effects, there's a failure to account for former history of smoking in many of the vapors. And also, there is a failure to account for the chronological order of the events, like the famous paper that was retracted from Glantz. And smoking cessation, there are also issues, ignoring the demographic data from the UK, Sweden, and okay, here I'm going to go a little bit faster. Here I'm going to dissect a study on pulmonary physiological damage. The study is there. It was financed by the NHI. And you can see here, if you see at the red square, it says, we show that chronic e-cigarette use generates 200 proteins in airway epithelia. Further confirmation that this that possible harm in chronic vapors. And of course, if you look at this, it looks impressive, devastating harms from vaping. However, there's always a however, it has a lot of problems. What problem? First, the samples are very small. It's 18 smokers, 18 non-smokers. The data is there, you can read it. And it is cross-sectional, and it's difficult to make inference on causality if it's cross-sectional. And also, the authors claim that the biological effects are chronicle, but actually their argument that is chronicle is because they look at in vitro and in vivo studies. They cannot prove that this is a chronicle effect. But worse, they claim that fast smoking story of the vapors, all vapors are ex-smokers in this study, had no effect on their results. And they cite a reference, Zhang et al., that allegedly demonstrates that many genes return to baseline after smoking cessation. But I looked at this reference, and this reference doesn't say anything of this type. It deals with a completely different issue. And also the statistics is quite modeled and is not conclusive. So this article is really bad, really sloppy. This is what I mean. These are sloppy papers. And there are dozens of studies and reviews of studies of this type. And they are all cross-sectional, and they observe effects that who knows if they are chronicle? I don't know. And then in many of these, they do not compare with smoking or with air pollution or other stimulants. And they are unable to disentangle the biological effects from former smoking. They claim they do. But once you look carefully, it is doubtful that they do that. Like in the article that I dissected, these are the studies that are cited, especially by pulmonologists and pneumologists in respiratory societies, to claim that vaping harms the lungs. At best, they could claim there are signals that vaping might harm might produce harms. But that's not the way that it is presented. It's presented as a fact. And according to the Spanish Respiratory Society, which our lungs were designed to breathe pure and fresh air. That's nonsense, really, because if that was true, smokers will die in 2 years. Yeah? If only fresh air, if that's the way. No, this is ignoring the defenses of the lungs, which are very resilient. See, it takes 30 years for people to get sick from smoking, and smoking is massively toxic, right? You don't have to have a PhD to understand this. Emissions, this is my own research. Emission studies are very important because they are the ground level of the pyramid. This is the pyramid of tobacco harm reduction science, right? First, we prove the emissions in a machine, then we see it in vitro, in model, and then we go to the human body. But the ground level is very important because imagine if the aerosol was toxic, the rest of the pyramid would fall down or would not even emerge. So these are very important studies. Now, if it is true that the aerosol is toxic, it has metals, aldehydes, free radicals, the proof of this must be in studies that have analyzed these emissions, right? Okay. Lights went off. Sorry. To evaluate this, my colleague Sebastian Soulet and I published in 2022 two extensive reviews, and we revised 48 studies of emissions, 12 on metals and 36 on organic byproducts. And these are the papers. And of course, here you cannot put a detector in the mouth, so this has to be done in laboratory, the machines that simulate the inhalation. And to evaluate consistency, we demanded several tests. For example, articles have to be, the laboratory studies have to be replicable. They have to provide all the information. An experiment that is not replicable is not worth anything, okay? The devices cannot be obsolete and they have to be in good conditions. And also, the vaping machines must reproduce as best as possible the puffing habits of humans, because we want to know what are the effects on humans. And especially, in particular, high-power devices have to be given a high airflow. This is very important. And I'm going to go a bit fast here. Now, the basic physics of aerosol, I simplified this a lot. What we have is an equilibrium between heat flux and forced convection. There is one energy enters to the vapor, and when the user inhales, it keeps a balance of this energy. It's essentially the balance of the energy supplied and the evacuation of the aerosol. There are more details, but I'm not going to stop on this. Okay, so the equilibrium state, what we have is that this can be verified in the laboratory by a linear relation between the evaporated liquid mass and supplied power, and it defines the powers where the devices work, and above these powers there is overheating, below there is underheating. Okay. Now our results, we put our results in a traffic light system, and the results are as follows, summarized. About 1/3 of the studies failed the quality tests. Therefore, the results are not reliable. 18 studies were in the middle. They failed 2 of the tests, so the results are in doubt. They are questionable, they may be okay, they're doubtful. And 14 results satisfy the test, therefore the results are reliable. And what a coincidence that all the studies that detected high toxic content are the studies that do not pass the consistency tests. And all the studies that detected low toxicity, and here low or high, depends on comparing with toxicological standards, they were the ones that were well done. In fact, you can say that all studies detecting excessive toxicity were unreliable. And this, for us, answers this issue of the toxicity of the aerosol, right? Now, the most common error is puffing a huge, powerful device with very low airflow. What happens in this case is that the range of power where the devices operate becomes very narrow. And this can be a problem. Lights went off. Okay. See? And also, what happens that if you are outside, just outside the optimal regime in the power range, this triggers the exponential production of carbonates, of toxins. So this is why and the user knows it, because if the user is vaping at too high powers, the aerosol will taste like shit, really. But in the laboratory, we can identify that, right? Okay, now, it is many studies, and I'm talking about hundreds of studies, do this error. What they do, here, they test the green square is the power range where the devices operate without overheating. And look, they test them in extremely high powers. And yeah, and of course, with a lot of carbonates, if you test a device at these powers, you are going to get a horrible aerosol, hot, full of toxins. And this is what they report. It's amazing. That's very bad. Okay? And there are many studies that do that. Now, just bear in mind the last slide. You have cytotoxicity and animal models. What are these? You are exposing cell lines and rodents to an aerosol. And how is this aerosol generated? Well, this aerosol, there are hundreds of studies that have generated the aerosol the way I described in the previous cell. We're talking about hundreds of studies. We are already beginning to review them, and it will be a scandal because there are hundreds of studies on cells and mice that are literally poisoning the cells and mice with poisonous aerosol because of the generation of aerosol. Now, these studies, they say, well, we just use the standard, but the standard is appropriate for cigarettes that the tobacco industry makes, e-cigarettes, which are low-powered. The standards do not work for high-powered devices, but we have told them. But there is no, when policy determines the science, criticism is irrelevant because, etc. That's politics. I don't want to talk about that. But then, this is a problem. This is a problem. Now, let me go very fast through environmental emissions. There are about 100 studies of secondhand vapor. They generate emissions using vapors because it's environmental. You can use volunteers. You need to use volunteers. And most of the studies, they have methodological problems. For example, the authors talk about the dangers of particles without understanding the chemical composition of the particles. The vaping volunteers sometimes are naive vapors, and so the exposure is not realistic, or they are forced to vape, like in one study, 80 times in a minute inside of a car. of course, you can, that's terrible. And also, most studies do not subtract the environment before vaping. So we don't know to what degree what they measure is contamination that existed before. Now, environmental, let's compare with tobacco smoke. See, in tobacco smoke, environmental, you have two emissions, the mainstream coming out of the mouth of the smoker and the side stream that it comes from the cigarette tip, right? In vaping, you only have the mainstream. But there's more. Like 80% of what is released is from the side stream, because the side stream is a continuous emission, right? On the other hand, mainstream is intermittent. Over 1,500 toxic compounds in significant quantities. And we all know that smoke, environmental tobacco, stays for a long time. Now, what happens here with environmental vapor? First, the vapor absorbs and retains 90% of what inhaled. And 99.9% of the full aerosol, particles and gas, is the solvents and water, right? And it evaporates in less than 20 seconds. So, yes, both are aerosols, but they are radically distinct aerosols. And warning, warning, warning. Everybody, be careful. Secondhand vapor contains ultrafine particles that get into the lungs of bystanders. You've been warned. Now, I would like you to meet the dreadful killer particle. This is the killing particle. It's a killer. So we have a nice lady doing her vaping, and then bang, the particle. And the particle, oh, hey, what happened here? You missed my joke. The particle will go into the lungs, and not the lungs of the children. Terrible, no? Terrible. But sadly, well, sadly for whom, reality is less dramatic. The particles are not harmful. They are liquid droplets made with the solvents, propylene glycol, glycerol, nicotine, and water. That's it. These are not terrible particles. They are not killer particles, like, for example, PM2.5 of air pollution, or the particles of tobacco smoke. This is the story of a particle. It evaporates very fast. In 5 seconds, they lose 50% of the mass. And of course, nicotine and VG and PG evaporate at different rates, but they all evaporate. Yeah? So imagine you are exposed to a killer, but the killer is evaporated. Right? So, no, but you know, all the studies in environmental vapor, they warn you, the particles, but that's nonsense. Okay? Nothing to do with the particles of air pollution. Now, what happens here? It is not obeying. Hey, the person who is managing this. Oh, what? Hey, somebody is. What's wrong here? They almost lose. Here, okay. What? Okay. Now, it's very important to appreciate the environmental impact of vaping, to emphasize that first, it is diluted. Second, it is visible. Third, it is intermittent. And fourth, it is directional. This is very, very important. Here, direct aerosol exposure happens only in the jet direction. Here we have a vapor, and there are circles 1.5, 2.5 meters. What happens during the puffing? See, it is a jet, and it's directional. Here I'm assuming no ventilation, but no ventilation is the most dangerous, the most harmful, right? Now, 50% of the droplets will evaporate at 1.5 meters, and only 5% of the droplets will be at 2.5 meters. But then what happens at that distance, oh, what's the matter with this? Hey, somebody's controlling this. Eh? Yeah, do it for me. Yeah, because I think there's some magic thing there over there. Okay, so, no, okay, no, you were right here, right? So, the blue thing, can you pass it? Yeah, okay. The blue thing is the turbulent area because the jet becomes mixed with air and the velocities become the same as velocities, environmental velocities. Circular motions make it turbulent, right? But the important point that you should see is that outside of the direction of the jet, there is zero exposure. However, the studies of environmental vapor, they do what I call shooting, fusilamiento. That is, here is the vapor, the volunteer vapor, and he's going to vape, or she is going to vape, and the sensor is here. Have you ever seen somebody that is vaping in a restaurant and throwing the vapor to the face of somebody? No. So the studies are really exaggerating because they are measuring only in the area of exposure. But all other directions, there is zero exposure. This is just to give you an idea of the environmental impact. Let's move to the... This was during puffing, a few seconds. Now, after puffing, boom, okay. After puffing, next, the jet has dispersed, and there is only turbulence around the dispersion of the puff. And next, and there is exposure only to a dilute gas, because all the particles have evaporated into a gas, and this gas is extremely diluted, and is made of light particles with high kinetic energy. So basically, there is nothing. In 20 seconds, this is why we can vape, and nobody will notice, because of the physical properties of the aerosol. Next, please. Next, okay. Although none of the studies, the industry studies are different, I must say. But none of the studies, they find anything. None of them find anything, yeah. But nevertheless, they claim that it's toxic and the particles, the killing particles, etc. And it is also bad for vulnerable people, has to be prohibited in all spaces. So we're seeing something familiar. Next, please. There is no justification for this extreme precautionism. It's just the normalization. It's the denormalization. It's the same process, right? Okay. Next. Okay, comparing with tobacco cigarette is overkill. In reality, vaping aerosol is less toxic than many household aerosols. Cooking, vacuum cleaning, candles, odorizers. But this is for another talk. I have also evidence. And now, this is, I'm finishing now. Being overwhelmed by huge, brutal forces in October 1936 in Salamanca, Spain, the philosopher Miguel de Unamuno, not armed, without resources, no funding from Bloomberg, nothing, right? Just a humble professor of philosophy, told the Franquistas had all the army, he told them, next, venceréis, mas no convenceréis. This means you might win, but will not prevail. Next, please. This is my final message. No pasarán. And we have to be very firm on this. We have to really defend. And when we argue with the other side, we have to argue with conviction. Example, vaping academic, the youth, etc. No, sir, there is no vaping academic. How can you say that? There is no vaping academic. You want to talk about vaping academic, we talk about politics. But there is no science in that. We have to say that, because if you say, oh yes, true, it's a vaping academic, but fortunately it's decreasing, and no, because you are playing into their narrative. Don't say that. Just say there is no vaping academic, there is no vaping epidemic among youth. It's a problem, it's an issue that has to be dealt, but it is not the problem that people make. Say it. No pasarán. This is my final message. Thank you. Are you the killing particle?
I hope not, but I wanted to thank you for your killer lecture. And actually, I want to say that I hope that your bullshit detector stays at 0 here at GFN. Thank you very much, Roberto.
Yeah, welcome.
And now I would like to invite Anne Molloy to present the 4 Kevin Molloy Fellowships for this year. The fellowships are named after our colleague Kevin Molloy, who was the first head of the Tobacco Harm Reduction Scholarship Program. The 2-year fellowships ensure that the rising stars for low and middle income countries continue developing their careers in tobacco harm reduction. Over to you, Anne.
No zappy thing to deter me. So, good evening, everyone. I'd like to begin this evening's presentation of these awards with a massive thank you to the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. For without their financial support of both the Kevin Molloy Fellowship and more widely the Tobacco Harm Reduction Scholarship Programme, which they continue to sponsor, none of these awards would be made possible. So, big round of applause for them. This afternoon, I had the opportunity to sit in with a session with the scholars, and it was just brilliant to see so many people involved in the promotion of tobacco harm reduction through their scientific research. So many people from different backgrounds, from media, from science, from health professionals. That diversity was wonderful. And if we just think about the figures, that since 2018, we've had 123 scholars go through the programme from 50 different countries. That's really going to have a wonderful impact. So Another big up to all of the scholars who are going through the programme. So I'm very happy to report that since the inaugural Fellowship Awards made here last year at conference, our 3 fellows, and I want to name them, Yusuf Adebayo from Nigeria, Sahan Lahu from Malawi, and Atta Ahmadi from Afghanistan, have all made excellent progress in developing advanced knowledge and research skills within the field of tobacco harm reduction, which in turn will contribute greatly to the public health of the countries they originate from, and for those countries with similar profiles. So I wish them continued success with their projects and in their professional development as tobacco harm reduction practitioners. Kevin himself was an early advocate of tobacco harm reduction. As a working class child growing up in Birmingham in the 1960s, he started smoking at a very young age. And I'll let you into a secret, they only had tobacco-flavoured cigarettes in those days, and yet somehow children still became addicted. Anyway, after several unsuccessful attempts to kick the smoking habit, it was not until he turned to the use of safer nicotine products, including gum and vaping, that he had success in quitting smoking. In 2021, Kevin sadly died from lung cancer, but not, as informed by his consultant, the type associated with smoking. He was just unlucky. However, those 26 years of smoke-free nicotine use improved his health, saved his money, and enabled his family to grow up in a smoke-free environment. All positive outcomes. Kevin loved this conference. As both a professional practitioner and a nicotine service user, he saw the connections made and the ideas developed here as essential in the progress of safer nicotine consumption. For it's only by coming together and sharing knowledge can we eventually action evidence-based change. Therefore, these awards, which actively seek to enhance our knowledge and promote the development of health outcomes within the global field of nicotine use, are a fitting tribute to the memory of Kevin's life and work. Thank you. And so to the awards, of which there are 4 fellowships. Let me find the right ones. So the first award goes to Arkady Sharkov from Bulgaria, who will produce an economic model applicable to all EU countries, comparing the economic effects of smoking when compared to safer nicotine products. Thank you. Arkady. The next award goes to Claudio Teixeira from Brazil, who is writing a book about nicotine aimed at health and other professionals, particularly in Latin America. Congratulations. And the third award goes to Jeffrey Zamora a brilliant documentary filmmaker from Costa Rica who will undertake a course in audiovisual production and continue to make THR films, including, I understand, one about Kevin himself, his life and his influence. Thank you, Geoffrey. Thank you. And the final award goes to Emmanuel Mwape from Zambia, another very talented filmmaker who will be undertaking a degree in visual communication alongside making a documentary on tobacco harm reduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. And before we proceed to the next part, a small announcement. As after this session, there is a conference party down at the Sphinx restaurant. Please make sure you wear your badge to the event. I would like to invite Dr. Alex Wodak to present this year's Michael Russell Award. Dr. Wodak is a physician, former president of the Australian Drug Law Reform Foundation. He started the first needle exchange program almost 40 years ago, and the first medically supervised injection center almost 25 years ago in Australia, when it was pre-legal. Dr. Wodak helped to start the National Drug and Alcohol Research Center in 1997. He was president of the International Harm Reduction Association for several years and has been interested in tobacco harm reduction since the early 90s. Alex, excuse me, that's the emotions. Alex, please announce the winner of this year's award.
Thank you for the generous introduction. Let me start by emphasizing what a huge honor it is for me to be invited to present this richly deserved award to Jerry Stimson. I first met Jerry in 1987 when he was working at Goldsmiths College in southeast London, and I've been lucky over the next 36 years to on and off be working with him. Now, most of us in this room are very lucky to have succeeded in one career, and we feel very happy to have done that. Jerry's had, by my count, at least 5 careers, maybe more, and he's been staggeringly brilliant in each of them. He's been spectacularly successful, first in academic research, then as a leader in academic research, then as a national and international drug harm reduction leader, then as an international tobacco harm reduction leader, and running through many of those periods, he was also a brilliant research editor. Now, it's important, I think, for all of us to try and learn from why Jerry has been so successful, so that perhaps we can try and apply these lessons in our own lives. Now, when we boil it down, Jerry has been remarkably persistent, even in the face of overwhelming difficulty, and all those fields that he operated in that I just identified were very difficult areas. He's also been indefatigable. He seems to have inexhaustible energy in everything he does. It helps also that Jerry has, in my view, very healthy values, and these include a firm commitment and respect to build and protect the following: social justice, human rights, evidence, and the need to draw conclusions and recommendations from existing evidence, even if that evidence is, as evidence always is, incomplete at the time. Jerry also understands that effectiveness in public health and policy comes from collaboration, rarely from working alone. Jerry is nothing if not pragmatic. He's more interested in identifying possible solutions than identifying more problems. Jerry has a bias to include as many stakeholders as possible, especially consumers, rather than excluding people, whatever their views. Jerry's research has helped improve our knowledge and understanding of people who use prohibited drugs. He helped our understanding of the effectiveness and safety of drug harm reduction interventions like needle syringe programs when we felt very threatened by an uncontrolled international HIV epidemic. He helped mobilize international and national support for drug harm reduction interventions and made a major contribution to the international adoption, expansion, and improvement of these programs. In the last decade, he repeated the mobilization of international and national support for tobacco harm reduction. What have been the outcomes from all of these efforts? Many lives have been saved. Many people have avoided contracting terrible diseases. Glaring health inequalities have been reduced. Huge social and economic costs have been averted. This award is our movement's way of acknowledging Jerry's achievements and contributions and thanking him. But I believe the best way of expressing our gratitude is to redouble our efforts to bring forward the inevitable collapse of opposition to tobacco harm reduction. So I'd ask Jerry to come forward and accept this beautiful award. Jerry, here it is. Could you please say a few words?
This will push me over the limit when I go through the check-in on the way home. A complete surprise. Since I announced my retirement, my imminent, well, stepping aside a little bit, to my team, they've kept a lot of things from me. I'm not sure if that's because they no longer trust my judgment or they're being kind to me. So this is really such an overwhelming surprise, and really a big thank you to you all, and a big thank you to Alex, with whom I've worked over several decades on harm reduction issues. It's strange to have been here because it's sort of 55 years of work, and I do deserve to do a little bit of time gardening and all the rest of it. But you suddenly find yourself at the end of those 55 years, and you reflect on what's been done. And it's quite interesting because I was in the addiction research unit at the Institute of Psychiatry when Michael Russell was there. I had my very first research job there at the age of 23, and I was lucky to design a study looking at how well heroin addicts functioned when they were being prescribed pharmaceutical heroin, which is harm reduction. And there's a long tradition of that within UK policy. And Mike Russell was there doing his early work on discovering aspects of nicotine dependence. And it was also interesting because Mike Russell was a smoker. He liked the occasional cheroot, so he kind of knew a lot of what was going on. So it's very nice to have that reward and to think back on that. I sort of had, many, as Alex said, quite a few different kinds of careers and changes, perhaps not enough. But I was always, from my sort of early sociological training, aware that people are active decision makers and move through life and, in many ways sort of self-directed. So I never had a kind of a clinical view, but I always had a view which was influenced by a sociologist called Howard Becker, who wrote a very important article. Howard Becker wrote a very interesting study on becoming a marijuana user. But he wrote another article about whose side are we on, and it was all about the importance of the perspective of people we're engaging with. So I like to think I've kept that perspective because this is all about people who are doing harm reduction. It's not experts who do harm reduction, it's not policies, it's not politicians, but it's everyday people who are making those decisions about how to lead, how to avoid risks associated with things they are doing. So it's almost my philosophy that the harm reductionists are the people who are doing harm reduction. So a lot of people to thank. I'd like to thank all the consumer activists and advocates. I'd like to thank all the many people in harm reduction who are very nice people. I mean, after many years in academia and elsewhere, it was really refreshing to come into harm reduction and meet such good people. And really a shock for me, because I was kind of a left-leaning public health person who hated industry. And I think I met my first industry people in around 2010. And when I was told, oh, we've got our harm reduction project, and I thought, BAT, you can't have a harm reduction project. You're not allowed to because harm reduction belongs to other people. But I met very interesting people along the way. Many people have stepped into my life and made it better. I'd like to thank all the KAC team and the Knowledge Action Change Communication team. We started out, Paddy and I started out in 2011. We'd had a few, I was retiring from one job and we'd had a few other sort of ups and downs, and we sort of sat around thinking, well, what should we do now? And we kind of invented this company called Knowledge Action Change with Jagosh and Bazola. Kind of a dream team, Nigerian accountant, tech expert, Paddy Scouser from Liverpool and me, so a rather odd mix of people. And in the first year, we did a few things, but now we've got 24, 25 people working with us, so we'd be very pleased with what we've done. And also, pleased with the scholarship program, which has been an extraordinary success. So lots of people to thank, and I'm sure I've forgotten to mention somebody I should have thanked, but thank you all for kind of stepping into my life and making my life better. And let's all look forward. We all have our own dreams about where tobacco harm reduction is going and where the world is going. So may all your dreams come true. Thank you.
So thank you very much all. That's all for today as when it comes to the formal proceedings. Now enjoy the conference party down at the Sphinx.